Alright, I am back with another video, and today we're doing a long-standing request, actually. I was kind of going through like my ideas for what-if builds, and then I kind of remembered something. I've never actually done a Dark Urge build that uses Storm Sorcerer. You think I would have by now, considering Storm Sorcerer is the default class, but no. My other Dark Urge builds have been Warlock, Barbarian, or everything but Sorcerer. So I've decided to take a crack at it today. I wanted to make a build that not only uses the Storm Sorcerer class as a base for the build, getting some interesting abilities there, but also kind of reflecting the Dark Urge's journey, because a lot of my Dark Urge builds are Redemption Dark Urge builds, with the exception of like the Alfira build, for example, which was just pure evil. So I kind of wanted to go along the idea of, yes, our White Dragonborn friend here is slowly coming to terms with his condition throughout the game, but then maybe once you hit the later levels around the start of Act 3 when you learn the truth of what the Dark Urge is, maybe he just fully embraces it from that point on. And as such, I think the leveling scheme for this build is going to reflect that. Anyways, I seriously hope you enjoy this build because I had a ton of fun making it, and it actually turned out to be quite powerful. But I'm not going to waste too much of your time at the start. Let's get straight into it. First up, we're going to be kicking things off as a fighter. Now, this is for a couple of reasons, but it's mainly just to set us up for basically this this build's fighting style. Quite literally, we want the two-weapon fighting style. Going with fighter to start is also going to give us access to all forms of armor and weapons, which is nice, as well as constitution saving throw proficiency, which is going to be great since we are going to be primarily a spellcaster with this build. But this is going to give us a lot of the combat capability that we want going into the game, basically, because again, we are going to want to use weapons with this build. We are an Assassin of Baal after all. Of course, we're playing as the default Dark Urge. That's kind of the point of this build, so it's going to give us some abilities from White Dragonborn. We're going to get a Frost Breath, which will actually synergize with the kind of Storm aspect quite nicely, as well as resistance to ice, or cold damage, I should say, which works quite nicely. As for the background, if you're playing as the Dark Urge, you will have the Haunted One background, but I have the Soldier background here because this is like an additional companion that I've created, because I couldn't quite get my Dark Urge profile to work correctly for some reason, so I had to kind of recreate the Dark Urge looks-wise. This is basically the Dark Urge and everything, but like the background, perhaps this is the Dark Urge's lesser-known twin. I'm not even going to bother coming up with a name for that. Let's just keep going. So, as for the ability scores, I kind of wanted something slightly more rounded, but we are going to be playing your kind of standard sorcerer stat spread here. But instead of going for 16 Constitution, I've gone for 16 Dexterity, because yes, we are going to be using finesse weapons with this build. You can see I've got a couple of daggers there. So Charisma at 16, main spellcasting stat. Dexterity at 16, main attacking stat. Constitution at 14, would like this higher if possible, but obviously stats work out differently. And I decided to, rather than put one at 12 and one at 8, I've just gone for a kind of split between intelligence and wisdom, just so we don't have any negative modifiers on them. Feel free to change it up however you like. Maybe you want more wisdom saves, put that to 12. Maybe you want to be able to jump and do stuff like that, put it into strength instead. Entirely up to you. As for your skill proficiencies, like I said, Haunted One is different. It comes with medicine and intimidation, so I went with the closest thing, which is Soldier, giving us athletics and intimidation, but obviously you would have medicine instead. As for our starting proficiencies, I quite liked going for insight, and you can kind of pick whatever you like for the second one. History, survival, perception's probably the best one though, so I would go for that. So now that we've got that first level of fighter kind of out the way, you could technically go for level 2, but this build kind of likes to have a certain amount of levels in the other classes that we're going to be going for here, so I'm going to suggest we dip straight out of this and start getting our Sorcerer on. Sorcerer is going to give us access to a ton of different things: utility spells, damaging cantrips, and of course our subclass, which you already know, is Storm Sorcery. Storm Sorcery is actually a really underrated subclass in my opinion. I know a lot of people like it anyway, especially when you pair it with something like Tempest Cleric, but I still just really love Storm Sorcery as its own thing. I love the level 1 feature, being able to fly after you cast a level 1 spell or higher. You can fly as a bonus action without receiving opportunity attacks, which is great. This is going to allow us to get to high up positions where we can kind of fly up and sneak into people's homes through their window or something, because yes, we are stabbing people today. Weird thing to say so casually. Anyways, as for our starting cantrips, of course we're going to want the kind of Storm Elemental cantrips. Shocking Grasp and Ray of Frost, because a lot of people forget that actually ice is a huge part of like the Storm identity, and since we are a White Dragonborn as well, by the time we're kind of finished leveling this build, we're going to have multiple abilities and resistances related to Thunder, Lightning, and Cold damage, so overall I think it's actually going to work out quite nicely thematically, so I definitely want to pick up the ice stuff too. We can also pick up Friends, because again, that kind of makes sense, and I believe Mage Hand would also be pretty appropriate for this build. I mean, Mage Hand has all sorts of implications and uses for a kind of stealthy rogue type character, so that's what we're going to be going for. Next up, we do get to pick our level 1 spells. I quite like picking up Chromatic Orb here, because this gives us access to a thunder, lightning, and ice spell all in one. However, you might prefer something like Ice Knife or Witch Bolt. However, Chromatic Orb will still create ice surfaces, much like Ice Knife does, but I could see why somebody might go for Ice Knife or Witch Bolt instead. And that's totally up to you if you want to do that. I'm also going to be picking up Shield because it is a great defensive utility spell. Next up, at Sorcerer level 2, we are going to gain access to Meta Magic as well as additional spells. I am actually going to pick up Ice Knife now, just so we have a piercing damage ranged option, which makes sense to me, as well as Meta Magic for Twin Spell and Distance Spell. I kind of like Distance Spell more than Careful or Extended in this case, because we're not going to be getting big blast damage radius spells like Fireball in this case, mainly Lightning Bolt, so it just goes in a line. So I don't think we need Careful Spell as much on this build, so Distance Spell increasing the range of our attacks, so if you want to do things from far away, kind of like a rogue shooting with a bow but with magic, we can absolutely do that. Expanded Spell could also work actually, it might be quite nice for this build, and Twin Spell is just Twin Spell, it's always good. At level 3, we do get to pick an additional meta magic option, and of course we're going with Quicken Spell, why wouldn't we? We also get to pick up a level 2 spell, and the first one I'm going to grab is actually Darkness. Darkness makes sense for kind of a stealthy, stabby type character, and with the Eversight Ring being an option for this build, you can actually do a Darkness Devil Sight combo to really make yourself hard to hit and always get advantage, because, spoiler alert, we're taking rogue levels in this build, because of course we are. But you can pick up other things, Misty Step, Hold Person, Shatter, so many different things make sense here, and remember you can always replace spells as well. Next up, at Sorcerer level 4, we're getting in access to another cantrip. I'm going to be going with Minor Illusion, again being able to distract your victim before stabbing them from behind. We also gain access to another level 2 spell, and again you have your options. Shatter is great, Hold Person is great, Invisibility makes sense, Knock makes sense for breaking into places. You can even, like I said, Misty Step also works. I'll be honest, there's so many different choices here that I would say would be good for this build, but the fact that we're going with Sorcerer does feel a bit limiting since our spell selection is a bit shorter. I would actually say Hold Person makes the most sense for this build thematically, so that's what I'm going to go with. We also gain access to an ability score improvement at this level, and since we're only going to be getting 2 feats with this build, unfortunately, I would say we need to just focus on ability score improvements alone, meaning that since we're mainly playing Sorcerer at the moment, I'm going to be bumping up our Charisma. Next up at Sorcerer level 5, we're going to get an additional meta magic point, as well as getting access to level 3 spells. And again, there are so many potential options here, and I've had to really think about what I thought would be good for this build. Remember that we are going to be getting quite a few spells when we hit level 6 of Storm Sorcerer, like Thunder Wave, Create, Destroy Water, all that sort of thing here. So we're not really going to need to focus on getting too many things. The only lightning spell we'll be missing out on if we don't take it here is Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt is going to give us an access to a massive line of 8d6 lightning damage, which requires a saving throw, but we can kind of get around that. So I really like Lightning Bolt here. I would also maybe consider replacing a spell at this point as well. If you feel like there's one of these lower level spells you aren't using very much, perhaps Chromatic Orb isn't exactly your deal, or Ice Knife perhaps, I would say, for example, now would be a good place to swap to a different spell. And I know, and in my combat footage I was testing out Haste, but I didn't actually really like Haste on this build that much, weirdly enough. I feel like with our lower constitution we are more likely to drop concentration if we get hit. While Haste does help with that, it's not ideal. What I actually prefer for this build is Slow. Slow basically is kind of like quite fun thematically for this build, targeting up to 6 creatures and slowing them, meaning that they're slower, their AC is reduced, their dexterity saves are reduced, and they cannot take reactions and bonus actions, I think. They can only choose like an action or a bonus action per turn, basically making it that if your victims try to run away, they can't. It feels really fun thematically and is much more fun of a kind of battlefield control spell, and you can kind of switch between this and Darkness depending on your preference. Haste can work, but I actually think Slow is a lot more effective as a piece of battlefield control here for this build. And if you really want to take both Haste and Slow, just slap the Darkfire shortbow on this build, giving you fire resistance as well. You can just go for that, but I actually quite like picking up Slow here. And I think instead of Ice Knife, actually I'm going to replace Chromatic Orb. I don't know why. It's entirely up to you. Choose what spells you like. Next up at Storm Sorcerer level 6, we're going to be gaining all of our main sorts of abilities that we want from Storm Sorcerer. We get another meta magic point, but we also now gain resistance to lightning and thunder damage. We also gain Heart of the Storm, allowing us to, whenever we cast a spell of level 1 or higher that deals lightning or thunder damage, we cause a small local storm, and all enemies within 6 meters take 3 lightning damage or 3 thunder damage, depending on the spell cast. Basically, it's more damage, which is also great. But now we also gain access to a bunch of spells, including spells we wouldn't normally be able to get. Cool Lightning, allowing us to cool down Utah Concentration, cool down lightning from the heavens, and recast it without using a spell slot as long as we maintain concentration, dealing a nice big chunk of lightning damage in this kind of small area. If you've got water set up from Create or Destroy Water, which we also get, you can create electrified surfaces, which is very powerful. We also gain access to Gust of Wind, which is nice, but not really your main option for spell casting, especially at level 2. Sleet Storm is brilliant, causing 4-phase storm that disrupts the concentration of spellcasters, douses fire, and creates icy surfaces. Now you can create ice surfaces to make your enemies slip and slide, meaning that you're going to have even more battlefield control. As well as Thunder Wave, allowing you to push enemies away if you feel like close combat isn't exactly working for you. Everything here, I think, fits really nice into the playstyle. I really like the idea of Sleet Storm, again, making it almost harder for your victims to kind of run away as they're like slipping and sliding and falling over as they try to escape. It almost creates that like Friday the 13th style like horror movie moment where it seems like that the victim should easily be able to run away as the killer slowly saunts up towards them, but in reality they can't. I kind of like that kind of vibe. Just imagine this victim slipping and sliding on the ice as the Dark Urge slowly approaches, completely unfazed, and I'm a psychopath. Very detailed, horrific murder scene I'm describing. Oh, I need to stop playing horror games and watching horror films, I must admit. Alright, next spell. We get access to another spell here, and it's entirely up to you what you want to pick. Misty Step, again, like I said, would be great. Fear could also make a lot of sense here, but we have a lot of concentration options already. So maybe just a simple extra blaster option would be nice. So I'm going to pick up Shatter as a thunder damage attack. And I think at that point, we don't really need anything else from Sorcerer. You can go for another level of Sorcerer if you so choose to be able to pick up level 4 spells. Ice Storm and Greater Invisibility are very, very tempting. But as I said, I think around the kind of level 8 range is where you're probably going to be maybe starting to get into Act 3, where you start to learn who the Dark Urge really is. And spoilers, although I kind of already said it, you are an Assassin of Baal. In fact, you are the Baal spawn. You are the top Assassin of Baal. So maybe at this point you finally decide, hey, you know what, let's go back to my roots, enough of this magic bollocks, we're going to slap in some stabbing. Which means at this point we're going to be multi-classing into Rogue, as I said. Rogue is going to give us access to sneak attack, and since we are using finesse weapons and ranged weapons with this build, we are going to gain access to both types of sneak attack, and we have lots of ways of getting advantage on our attacks. So we're going to be able to get this off quite consistently. We're also going to get access to some extra abilities. At this point we can become quite a stealthy character, gaining both proficiency and expertise in it, as well as being able to grab expertise in intimidation, which just feels absolutely lovely. That plus 10 to intimidation feels great for a character like this. Next up, we gain our cunning actions, allowing us to hide, dash, and disengage as a bonus action. Dashing is going to be super important here, as it is going to synergize with some equipment that you have the option to take later, but hiding is also great as well. Basically, we are going to be playing like a mix of Sorcerer and Rogue with this build, where you're going to be using kind of the standard actions and like the standard strategies from both Sorcerer and Rogue, but they actually clash, and, well, not clash, but they actually combine and work really, really nicely. So I think you're going to quite enjoy the playstyle here. Now, at level 3 of Rogue, you do have a choice. Obviously, Thief is always the meta. Gaining that second bonus action, especially on a build like this, would be nice. But I don't think it's quite on theme for this build. I actually do quite prefer Assassin here. Assassin is actually going to synergize nicely with our Sorcerer stuff, because we gain advantage on attack rolls against creatures who haven't taken a turn yet, allowing us to get sneak attacks, or, you know, we can fire off a ranged spell or something like that. We also make it so any successful attack roll against a surprised creature is a critical hit, meaning that we can basically go straight in and stab someone, and we also regain our action and our bonus action at the start of combat. Now, this is really fun. So what you can do is before you go into combat, you can cast Create or Destroy Water, which will actually not alert enemies or make them hostile to you. Then you cast Lightning Bolt or Call Lightning to get double lightning damage on everyone who's in range. You would have seen it at the start of the combat footage. And then, because of Assassin's Alacrity, you immediately regain your action and bonus action. And since your initiative should put you before everyone else with this build, you will be able to immediately start sneak attacking everyone because they haven't had a turn yet. And then, well, you've killed maybe 1 or 2 enemies at least before the battle has even really begun. This build is basically a surprise bitch I'm here now type build, where whether you're doing double lightning damage or big sneak attack damage, you're going to have a lot of options to open combat with a hell of a lot of damage, and then be able to control the battlefield and continue to do big damage with sneak attack and big lightning spells throughout the whole encounter. The only problem is that this build will have in that respect is the slightly limited spell slots. We only have up to 3 level 3 slots with this build because we only went to a level 6 of a full spellcaster, so this build might be slightly long rest dependent if you are going to be going Nova pretty much every combat, which I don't think should really matter too much. By the time you get to Act 3 you have enough camp supplies, but that's not really going to matter, and the game obviously encourages frequent long resting, so I don't think it's actually really a downside of the build. Anyway, but Assassin's Alacrity and plus the other features are really going to make you feel like that stealthy assassin who can turn on the storm when necessary. Next up at Rogue, level 4, we are going to gain access to another feat, and at this point, since we have a pretty decent charisma and a way to boost up our spell save DCs quite nicely, let's bump up our dexterity instead to make our melee attacks a bit more effective. And now finally, we have Rogue level 5, which you can take if you want slightly more sneak attack damage. I believe it becomes a 3d6 at this level. This would also give you uncanny dodge, allowing it so that whenever an attack hits you, you only take half the usual damage. I believe this is once per turn. So that can be quite nice for tankiness, so I do personally recommend it. Although level 2 of Fighter would give you Action Surge, allowing you to use an extra action, which is always nice on spellcasters. And as I said, Sorcerer level 7 would give you access to level 4 spells, of which you have quite a few cool options like Greater Invisibility, which could be really nice for a build like this. So it's entirely up to you what you want to grab. In my testing, I used level 5 of Rogue, and that did just fine. But of course, you could go to that extra level of Sorcerer, which is probably what I would personally recommend, actually, to get that like Greater Invisibility and such like that. But then again, this last level is really customizable. Go with whatever strikes your fancy. And that is the build. Overall, like I said, what you're getting out of this is a ton of different ways of controlling the battlefield, manipulating your targets, and dealing damage to them. You've got sneak attack, you've got finesse weapons, you've got massive lightning damage with Create or Destroy Water and Lightning Bolt or Cool Lightning, you've got Sleet Storm for battlefield control, you've got Slow and Hold Person to really get in that damage, Ice Knife to create slippery surfaces. Hell, you can even use ice attacks like your Dragonborn Frost Breath on the watery surfaces you create to create ice surfaces to really ruin your enemy's day. And again, we also have access to a pretty awesome fighting style with dual daggers, which I'll be getting into in a minute. But overall, you're going to be getting the best of both worlds for Sorcerer and Rogue, which actually work together quite nicely. And again, this build has a lot of room for customization, swapping out one of those levels or even the subclass to suit your fancy. Entirely up to you, but I really like the setup that we do have here. We even have access to Darkness, which just makes any build 10 times better. So I'm quite happy with how this one turned out, but let's get into the equipment to see how the rest goes. As you can see, there's a lot of equipment here, so we have a lot of options and variants in the equipment as well, so let's get into it. Let's start off with our main melee weapons. Again, I really wanted to keep that kind of ball list theme, so there's definitely some equipment here that could be changed out for more optimized options, but I really wanted to show off a different fighting style that I don't show off very often, which is, again, dual daggers. And so as such, I went with the Dollar Amorous, which is kind of like the ball list dagger. This basically, whenever you land a critical hit with a weapon or an armed attack, it deals an additional 7 damage. I've buffed both this dagger and our offhand dagger up with a twin cast Straightthroat Glaive, which we can do on our own since we're part Sorcerer, making this a +3 weapon with an extra d4 of lightning damage. Now, again, daggers aren't the strongest weapons, you can technically use something better, but I feel like with the abilities that this provides, as well as the fact that we're getting the extra elemental damage on top, as well as a bunch of our other equipment adding even more damage on, I don't think the low base damage of the d4 of die is actually really going to affect us here. I mean, you'll see the combat footage, we still absolutely shred with the damage. But that's the Dollar Amorous. Again, you can replace this with something else, Rhapsody, the Knife of the Undermountain King, whatever you feel is appropriate. Next up, though, we have a dagger I don't believe I've gotten the chance to show off on the channel before. This is the Cold Snap. The Cold Snap comes with a d4 of cold damage, as well as the d4 of lightning damage that I've added on with the Straightthroat Glaive. While this weapon is in our offhand, we gain Chilling Counter. When a creature misses you with an attack, it must succeed a DC 13 con save or be chilled for 2 turns. It also provides a +1 to our armor class. Chilled, for those of you that don't know, basically if it makes the entity vulnerable to cold damage. So now, not only can we make our enemies vulnerable to lightning damage as well through water, well, I guess water does, the wet condition does also make them vulnerable to cold damage, but now we can do it without needing to set up Create or Destroy Water either, and we'll be able to dodge things quite a lot, especially if we're in darkness or such like that, or we're using other status conditions to reduce our enemy's chance to hit, which I'll get to in a minute. But Chilled is actually a really, really nice status condition, and we can stack this with other ice and thunder related status conditions and lightning status conditions to really make this build feel like a chaotic storm of ice, lightning, and fire. Not ice, lightning, and thunder, I should say. My apologies. So yeah, the Cold Snap felt really, really thematic for this build, and I really wanted to show it off here. Unfortunately, though, these are both Act 3 options. So if you want some earlier game options, we're going to be looking at the Ritual Dagger, which allows you to, after a successful attack with the dagger, the wielder receives a 1d4 bonus to attack rolls and saving throws, and the unique action Blood Sacrifice, allowing you to basically do the same thing, but kind of attacking yourself, doing it as a bonus action, which I felt was quite fun, felt on theme for a build like this, as well as the Susa Dagger, which allows you to silence a target on hit, so you can stab them, and if they somehow still survive, they can't even scream. Yeah, I need to go to therapy. But yeah, those are some powerful Act 1 options. Well, powerful, they're fun. You're mainly going to be focusing on your spellcasting in the early game anyway, so it's not a huge deal. As for a ranged weapon, I didn't really specify one for this build. Any kind of ranged weapon will work, so you can use any of them. Hell, you might want to go dual hand crossbows with this build. But I decided to just throw in the Deadshot here to reduce our critical hit rate by 1. As well as doubling our proficiency bonus when rolling attacks with this weapon. It's just there to be a decent ranged option, but you can throw any ranged weapon in here and it'll be absolutely fine. But the extra chance to critical hit is always nice. Now, on to the main equipment. First up, you have an option of 2 hats. The one I have equipped here is the Coldbrin hat. Any condition afflicted on a target also provides 2 turns of Encrusted with Frost. Encrusted with Frost is another ice-based condition, meaning the affected entity is disadvantaged on dex saves, which is great for our spells that require dex saves, and when they have 7 or more turns remaining, they take 1 to 4 cold damage and become frozen, which frozen means they are completely incapacitated, but if they're dealt bludgeoning, thunder, or force damage, the ice shatters, ending the condition. Well, we can avoid doing all of those since we have slashing damage and we just don't use our thunder attacks, meaning that we can basically completely trap our enemies in ice and play with our victim a little bit before eventually taking their life. Again, really, I'm disturbing myself here. So that's a potentially fun condition. However, the other condition we can go for is Hat of the Storm Scion's Power. Whenever the wearer deals thunder damage, they gain Arcane Acuity, meaning that for each stack of Arcane Acuity that you have a +1 bonus to spell attack rolls and spell save DC. Probably one of the most broken status effects in the game by far. I was talking with a community member yesterday, Boss, who used my Dancer of Elistre build, but actually used the Helmet of Arcane Acuity on that build, and it really takes that build to the next level, like holy crap. Really, really fun. Anyways, so Hat of Storm Scion's Power if you want to focus more on the thunder stuff, or the Coldbrim Hat if you want to focus more on the ice stuff. Totally up to you, completely flavor-wise, they're both quite strong. Next up, we have the Deathstalker Mantle. We're playing a Dark Urge. Of course we're going to take the Deathstalker Mantle. Whenever we kill an enemy, we become invisible. This is another way of gaining advantage and getting us out of a sticky situation. Also, you get this thing pretty much for free in Act 1, so you might as well pick it up. Next up for our main armor, of course, I've gone with the Ballist armor. Why wouldn't I? Enemies within 2 meters of us become vulnerable to piercing damage, and we also gain a +2 bonus to initiative rolls. This is going to allow us to move first when we need to, so we can always get the jump on our enemies. As well as the fact that all enemies around us become vulnerable to piercing damage, meaning that all of our dagger attacks are going to do double damage. So now we have a way to make enemies vulnerable to every different type of damage that we deal aside from thunder, which is huge. That means we're always going to be doing big damage no matter what method of attack we decide to use. But of course, this is an Act 3 option, so some early game options that I have here that I quite like. These are 2 functionally, basically the same functionally, but it's basically like, this one's kind of nicer for fashion. This is the Padded Armor +2, but you have to get it from a loot table, as well as the Studded Armor +1, which technically has slightly less resistances. You take 1 more bludgeoning damage than you would with this one, because this one reduces it by 2, this one only reduces it by 1, but the Studded Leather Armor +1 is a guaranteed quest reward, so this could be a guaranteed option to go for in Act 1, but of course, you just upgrade to the Ballist Armor regardless. Next up for the gloves, of course, I've gone with the Gloves of Belligerent Skies. Whenever we deal thunder, lightning, or radiant damage, we inflict 2 turns of Reverberation. Reverberation makes it so that the enemy has a -1 penalty to strength, dex, and con saves, making all of our other effects a lot easier to land, as well as when the entity has taken 5 or more turns of Reverberation, they take 1d4 thunder damage and are knocked prone, or possibly are knocked prone. So, overall, it just gives us another status effect to spread around, but this isn't necessarily required for this build to function well. You won't be stacking Reverberation as much as other sort of other builds that kind of use these gloves. So while we do have options to boost it up, it's entirely up to you if you maybe want to swap to something else. But I do think like this does add a little bit to the build, as you'll see as we get into like the combat and such like that. And finally, for the boots, we have a few options, and each of these will work quite nicely depending on what you want to focus on. Here we have the Water Sparkers. The Water Sparkers basically make any wet surface you stand on during combat electrified. So the wet surfaces we create with our Create or Destroy Water ability will become electrified, which means they are going to electrocute and deal lightning damage to foes standing in the water. And if we ever start our turn on an electrified surface, we also gain 3 lightning charges. Lightning charges are going to allow us to add extra lightning damage to all of our attacks and give us better attack rolls as well. This kind of makes up for the fact that we don't have maxed out dexterity, as well as the Hat of the Storm Science power, making up for the fact that we don't have maxed out charisma. Also, we can do a big chunk of d8 of lightning damage if we stack up enough charges. This is a pretty solid way to get lightning charges with this build, especially since we're going to most likely want to coat our enemies in water, making them wet, so we can deal double damage to them most of the time anyway. So this would probably be the option that I would have on the most, but you do have a couple of extra options depending on the playstyle you want to go for. You can also pick up the Speedy Light Feat. Since we have a bonus action dash, you can instead guarantee you're always going to be able to get lightning charges by making a dash as a bonus action. Entirely up to you. I think the Water Sparkers are slightly better for this playstyle, but this is, I think, a slightly more consistent. Up to you. As well as the Boots of Stormy Clamor, if you want to take away the lightning charge thing and replace it with Reverberation, stacking even more Reverberation. This works nicely with the Coldbrim Hat, because whenever we inflict Encrusted with Frost, we'd also inflict Reverberation as well, allowing us to stack that up a bit more easily. So any of these boots will work. They're all obtained pretty early in the game, so it's a bit up to personal preference of what kind of flavouring you want to go for with this build. Next up, let's get into the accessories. First up, the Amulet of Bull. Of course we're going to use this. We're a Bull list. Makes sense. It allows us to inflict bleeding upon targets that have their maximum hit points whenever we attack them. Bleeding targets take an additional 2 slashing damage at the start of each turn and have disadvantage on Constitution saves, but they can remove this by healing. Obviously, makes sense for a build like this. You get it as part of the Dark Urges story, so it makes sense. However, this is an Act 3 option, so I've got 2 options for the early game, one that I had already pre-prepared, and one that I just thought of. So the Necklace of Elemental Augmentation would allow us to add our spellcasting ability modifier to the damage dealt from our Cold, Lightning, and Thunder cantrips. Well, we don't have a Thunder cantrip here. In fact, is there actually a Thunder cantrip in this game? I forget. That's interesting. But basically for our Ray of Frost and Shocking Grasp, we would deal more damage with those cantrips. A bit similar to Agonizing Blast from Warlock. That's kind of like an early game option. Another earlier game option that might be better for you is the Spine Shredder Amulet, which will allow you to, whenever you deal a ranged spell attack, you can inflict Reverberation as well. That would be another way to spread a Reverberation if you wanted to go down that route. But I feel like the Amulet of Bull is the main thing you're probably going to want to end up using anyway. Next up for our rings, you have 4 options here, and you can kind of mix and match depending on your playstyle. The Eversight ring is going to make you immune to the blinded condition, allowing you to do darkness shenanigans. We also have the Sparks Wall here, allowing it so that you cannot be electrocuted, because of course we make these electrified water surfaces. We ourselves can also be electrocuted. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So if you're going for kind of like the Create or Destroy Water strategy, with the Water Sparkers even, you're probably going to want to use this ring as well. But it also gives you resistance to lightning damage, but we already have that, so it's not a huge deal. At least that part is, but you definitely want to make that immunity to electrocuted kind of a top priority if you're going to go with the main strategy I've outlined. There are a couple of other ring options though. Of course, we have the Ring of Spiteful Thunder, because that allows us to, whenever we deal thunder damage to a reverberating creature, it has to make a con save, and if it fails that con save, it becomes dazed, meaning that it has disadvantage on wisdom saves, it can't take reactions, and it loses the dexterity bonus from their armor class. Again, using our abilities as a sorcerer to make our enemies more vulnerable so we can effectively go for the kill. Again, kind of on the theme of this like sorcerer assassin thing we have going on. But also another thing we can go for is the, come on game, click off the menu, there we go, is the Snowburst Ring. Whenever we deal cold damage, we also create a 4.5 meter circle of ice around the target. So all we have to do is throw out a Ray of Frost, an Ice Knife, whatever, and we gain that extra bit of icy surface that our enemies have to try and get out of, again preventing them from running away. A little bit more battlefield control, that again you can just use Ray of Frost to do this, so it's not reliant on your spell slots to create those icy surfaces if you so choose. And of course, if you create a water surface, then now all you need to do is hit an enemy on that surface with Ray of Frost, and suddenly that whole area is now covered in ice, which can be very, very powerful. And yeah, I don't think there's much else to talk about. I'll quickly outline the fact that all of the equipment here is either coloured in the Black and Azure dye or the Harlequin Black and White dye. That's how I make it so I think the Speedy Light Feet get that kind of darker colour, but the Water Sparklers are coloured as well. So yeah, you can kind of just use whatever dye you like here, but those are my two kind of picks, because I quite liked the black and blue aesthetic for a kind of lightning and ice build. But yeah, that is the build. I'm actually quite proud of how this one turned out. I didn't actually initially realise how much synergy Storm, Sorcerer, and Rogue just in general have. And again, it can be any subclass of Rogue. Thief giving you that extra bonus action. We are dual wielding, that can be really nice, as well as like quick and spell shenanigans too. There's also, obviously, Assassin was my kind of main choice, and I already outlined why that can be good, but also Arcane Trickster does actually have a place on this build. You would get more spell slots, you would get access to more utility spells, and you would even get access to the Mage Hand Legerdemain, which could have a ton of implications with a build like this, and would definitely be on theme. So feel free to experiment and try out different variations of this build. Like I said, that 7th level of Sorcerer is also really tempting. It's entirely up to you, really, what you want to go for with this build. There's a lot of room for customization here. But yeah, I don't think there's much else to talk about. This build, in my opinion, I think is really, really fun and really, really effective. You're always going to be able to deal out massive damage whenever you want, but if you want to take a step back and focus on that battlefield control aspect, you can do that as well. You have so many different tools available to you to really turn the battlefield in your favor. And I think I've managed to capture kind of maybe what Larian were going for when they were thinking of like the Dragonborn Storm Sorcerer Bullspawn Assassin. I feel like everything that we've kind of grabbed here today does synergize quite nicely with each other to create that feeling of this unstoppable killer who can really, really damage their victims. They can really get into the nitty-gritty with how evil they can be. Like, you think about the implications of things like electrocution and freezing, like, their victims before going for, like, kills and such like that. It gets dark, as I've kind of struggled with this whole video. But yeah, no, overall, like I said, I'm really, really proud of this one. I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I hope it satisfied the urge of everyone who was asking for this Storm Sorcerer Dirge build. And again, I really, really hope that I was able to deliver on that for you. Anyways, that is going to do it from me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.